For Louisiana versus all y'all, Jarrett Roser here. Excited about a chat today. We've had some legends on. Robin Fambro, Danny Broussard. He's already smiling. I'm gonna put him into some lofty territory, at least for Louisiana versus all y'all's sake. Roy Lang III, a guy who from Chicago and some South Florida roots came to Shreveport years ago as a young golfer, started at the Shreveport Times the same year I was starting high school, and has been telling everyone stories up in Shreveport and around the region ever since. And we're going to talk about a lot of those stories, but wound down 21 years at the Times with a great night over at Houghton, sharing some time at a special place to your heart recently, and we'll talk some about that as well. But Roy, what's up, man? Thanks for joining.
Oh, Jared, thanks for having me. I want to clear things up. First of all, I am not in the same category as Robin Fambro. Let's just get that out of the way. She is a legend, and everybody, I know you aspire to be like, and certainly covering stuff. She's the best. She's a Hall of Famer for good reason. So, but thanks for having me, man. I really love what you're doing. It's pretty cool. I just love the approach you're taking. I mean, when you log on to your new deal, you don't know what you're going to get. It could be high school, college. I mean, some slap like me. I mean, you're doing a cool job. I love what you're doing.
I appreciate that quite a bit. And I mean, as soon as I saw your post that you were ending that long tenure at the Times, I knew that we could have a really great conversation and just kind of share some of those stories, share some perspective on, just some of those experiences, some of the people we've had a chance to meet, as well as obviously it's a increasingly weird industry and just kind of where you see some of the journalism piece going. I told you I've got a chat with Thomas Bachman in about an hour, but up until that point, man, we can just kind of take it where it goes, because I'm sure you have plenty to share if you're in the mood.
Oh, absolutely. Tom, another guy that's going to make me feel old because I covered him. So but man, what a job he's doing. That'll be a fun conversation for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. So take me through some of it. I know it's probably been a little bit of an emotional walk away, but sometimes you have to kind of make a move and turn the page to another chapter. But you shared that long note about what those 2 decades meant to you. You had a chance to go out and cover another game at Houghton that I mentioned is a place that you've spent a lot of time through your years at the Times. What's the last couple weeks or so been like?
Oh, it's definitely been emotional. There's no doubt about that. And I knew it was going to be. I mean, I haven't had a job for 21 years. I mean, that's how I looked at it. Until the last probably 2 months I was at the Times, I really didn't feel like I was working. Even though the hours may have been 60, 70, 80 hours a week, it just really didn't feel like it most of the time, because I was telling good stories, going to big events, looking for the next great kid to tell a story about. And, when all of a sudden that abruptly comes to an end after 21 years, it was tough. And, in that note, I only got to mention a couple of people, and I just stuck to basically the people that helped me start. But man, as you know, if you started thanking all the people that, made it possible for you to tell all those stories. I mean, I could write a book, definitely, about all the people. So it's been emotional, but, you sort of alluded to it. Sometimes you got to just rip the Band-Aid off. And, it had come time with the way the industry was going, with the way our company was going. It had come time for me to leave. Not something that I wanted to do overall, but something I had to do.
And obviously, I mean, all those connections have meant so much to you. But for a guy not from Louisiana originally, who ends up here, what ultimately has you settled down for this long? And I mean, you're staying in Shreveport now moving forward as well. Settle down. What locked you in early or kept you here over so many years? What has kind of stood out that made this place or that place home?
Yeah, I came from Florida, and I was, this is almost 22 years ago, was doing internet broadcasting for a site that announced and displayed greyhound and thoroughbred racing in Florida from all over the world. I mean, I was calling, greyhound races from Daytona Beach to Washington to whatever. So it was fun. It was crazy. I had met a girl when I was at Centenary, and we started dating. And next thing, I was in my time in life where I could leave Miami and just whatever. I'm going to go try Louisiana. Probably didn't think I was going to be here for more than a couple years. Took a job actually with the captains doing like video broadcast. It was going to be some sort of video thing. Got up here, the job position was eliminated when I got up here. So I came to Louisiana for a job, didn't have a job. Literally walked into the Times, said, "Are you hiring?" And they said, "Well, we could do you write?" And I said, "Well, I'm a broadcast journalism major." I said, "I can write." And, go cover this AAU coach, Mike Theus, by the way. We need a story on him. Long story short, hey, why don't you apply for a job? Applied for a job, misspelled John McCloskey's name, the guy who was hiring, on the envelope of the resume. Somehow he didn't throw it out. He said he normally threw him out when somebody misspelled his name. And next thing you know, I've been there 21 years. So, but what kept me there really was the job. I mean, of course, the relationship didn't last. The job lasted way longer than that. And I just got into to something where I was covering, Super Bowls and Dallas Cowboys and New Orleans Saints and high school football and golf majors. I mean, it was literally, growing up, I loved every sport. And I found myself being able to cover every sport, athletes, coaches, fans. It was crazy. I was definitely living the dream. And that really is what kept me here for so long. And then, it paid off later in life. I found my wife, which certainly was a blessing. And that's what's keeping me here now. So it just all worked out terrific. But it was all because of my job at the Times.
And you mentioned you had a chance to cover quite a bit. You kind of you ended up in this nice position between the two NFL franchises and having that background in golf and just being able to be involved in so many different aspects, not just in Shreveport, but regionally. Were there any, and I mean, maybe there were many, just moments, events, stages that you had a chance to cover where you kind of looked around and said, wow, like how did this story lead me here?
Right. My first Super Bowl was New England and Carolina. Jake Delhomme was quarterback in Carolina, down in Houston. I want to say 03, maybe that's right. And I was sitting there. Of course, that was the Janet Jackson, Justin Timberlake deal. So that was memorable. I was like, I couldn't believe that I was covering a Super Bowl. And then I think that same year, just a couple months later, I covered my first Masters. And really, I think walking up and down the fairways at Augusta is where I first realized, like, what am I doing here? Like, what am I doing? Like, this is crazy. And, a lot of that had to do with David Toms. I was so lucky to have a golf background when really nobody at the time at the paper had any golf background. And David Toms was one of the best players in the world, just coming off Hal Sutton. Sudden. So I was lucky there. You mentioned the two NFL franchises, being able to cover the Cowboys and the Saints. I mean, it was Shreveport. For a lot of people will knock Shreveport for sure, and especially sports-wise with what we've had and what we have. The Mudbugs are basically the only team left in Shreveport. But the proximity of Shreveport to Houston, to Dallas, to New Orleans, Baton Rouge, allowed me to do a lot of things. And then Gannett would say, hey, we need help covering this. And, just a confluence of so many things led to the ability to go to a lot of big events. And, and then finally, 16, 17 years after my career started, I was in Cleveland for Game 7 of the World Series with my beloved Chicago Cubs, seeing something that I never thought I would see. So it's been pretty cool.
Yeah, no doubt. And we talk about some of those professional moments in terms of the professional ranks of sports, but you've obviously covered a ton of local high school sports and just community type sports and events and figures and been such a big voice in promoting some some young Shreveport native successes, and you have a chance to go out and cover that game at Houghton that I mentioned, and they make sure to recognize you after. What have some of those moments been like, whether that last one and what that meant to you, or just some of the opportunities to work with some of those young folks coming up through the ranks?
Well, one thing I prided myself in, and I really hope that I did this, because I wanted to, whether I was covering the Super Bowl or the Masters or Houghton Bird or Logansport Haynesville, I treated it the same. I felt like I treated it the same. I felt like it deserved as much attention as, those other events that I mentioned. So that was one thing I definitely tried to do. I mean, I remember the Logansport Haynesville state championship game in 2016, one of the craziest games I've ever seen. You were probably at that, I'm sure. And that is just as memorable as the, Malcolm Butler interception that I saw in Arizona in the Super Bowl, at least to me. And telling the story was just as much fun to me. So, I've covered way more high school football games than I have NFL games or college games, and they've just been as much fun to me. And I mean, I could list off, and then you just go see guys like Greedy Williams, Devin White, guys that go on to have success at the next level and then the next level. And, you know what it was like. You remember they gave you time throughout their career. And not everybody does. I'm sure you've run across some kids that maybe get to the next level and they're like, Jared, hold on, I don't have time. It happens. But the kids that do, you appreciate, you love, and you love to promote them. And then, fast forward to what you talk about Houghton, just so many things have happened, and it's just been really weird in Houghton for me, and so many good stories. Rodney Guin having a heart attack and basically having a 0.1% chance of surviving. He was the head coach at Houghton at the time. Made a trip over to Dallas to literally see him take his first steps after he came out of a coma for 2 weeks. I mean, it was strange. Obviously covered some great football games there. And then Jason Brotherton, the current head coach, took time after that, my last game with the Times, and had a nice little placard for me in the press box, and then started his, they had just won a playoff game. And the first thing he says, he starts talking about, how many games I've covered there and how special it was. So, those are the stuff that you'll just never forget. And, whether it was Houghton or Haynesville or Bird or whatever, all these kids and all these coaches at one time or another certainly have had a special place in my heart.
What have some of those moments meant in recent weeks, as whether it be, a coach or a team or a kid that you cover at some point, or just, any reader in the area or whoever kind of reaches out, sends a note, some colleagues, whoever it may be, that just kind of shares that little memory or appreciation or whatever it has been?
Man, that has been the most fun, is that a story that I wrote that I would remember if you asked me about it, but unless you ask me about it, I it's not coming to the top of my mind. Couple parents have reached out. Hey, you did a story. Do you remember the story you did in 2004 on my kid when he was at Bird or whatever? That meant so much to our family. And this coach, the same thing. We love that you took, the fair side to the story. It wasn't necessarily the side that we liked, but you were fair in what you did, and that made us better. We had to, keep track of our checks and balances, so to speak. And, those kind of things. One guy yesterday tweeted that out of the blue, some column about a NASCAR race that I attended as a fan in 1994 or 5, I think it was. And I had written a Mother's Day column about it a decade ago. And he brought that up and how he'll never forget that. And I was like, holy cow. I mean, you're just going way back now. And it's cool, man. I mean, I really, we all do this to tell good stories and hope you have an impact on somebody. And it's not about going to Super Bowls. It's not about that, because those emails and those tweets, remembering stories like that, those are the things that you really take to heart.
You mentioned Greedy, you mentioned Devin. Folks will know because of the time you spent covering Houghton. Dak Prescott is a guy that people ask me a ton about now, and I say I never had the chance to watch Dak in high school. I saw the video game numbers coming up at all state meetings and stuff like that. But what, I guess, some of those memories of those guys, how many of those, and Dak may have been one of them, that you remember watching at the high school level, and whether it be football or another sport, but you saw a young athlete and realize, that kid's going to be in football terms playing on Sundays or whatever the case may be for their sport?
Yeah, immediately that come to mind, Dak, Devin White, Morris Claiborne was a kid in high school that just stood out. Tre'Davious White, obviously. And I could probably think of a bunch more, but Dak he's just been a great guy. Even when he went to Mississippi State, always had time for a call. When I went up to a game, he'd always have time to chat. And just the way that, in Starkville, Mississippi, Dak Prescott is a legend. I mean, they love Dak Prescott. I remember doing a story. I talked to the mayor, and the housing market had gone up, and they fully believe it was because of Dak Prescott leading Mississippi State to their first ever number one, national ranking. And he said the economy has been boosted by Dak Prescott. And, it's beyond that, what he does to his teammates, how his teammates react to him, what type of a leader he is. Those are the guys, to me, from playing sports myself, that I just love, because if you can get a group of people from a bunch of different backgrounds, bunch of different talent levels to all come together and feel like you're just as important as that guy and that guy's just as important as you, that's rare. And he's done that at every level. And, the Dallas Cowboys, when I go over and cover those games, he'd always sort of give me a wink or a look or whatever. And one time I brought Rodney Guin over there as a surprise to him, brought him in the post-game press conference. And it literally stopped the press conference for like a minute and a half when he walked up to the podium and saw Rodney Guin sitting in the front row, and like he couldn't talk. I mean, the relationship you see with these star athletes, multimillionaires, when they see their high school coach or even a youth coach, it's just a different deal. It's not about the money to them. It was about what they meant to him. You're sort of a father figure, and just seeing that and being able to tell stories like that is amazing. But, Dak is probably the leader right now. I mean, Tre'Davious White would be right up there, Devin White. But the leader of the pack of champions, not only of their football teams and their football talent, but this community.
What is it like for somebody that covered them at such a young age to see them in these cases with football guys playing on Sundays, and particularly a guy that, I mean, you're a journalist and you cover things fairly, but you certainly grow an attachment to a guy like Dak through the years, and to see them have some of the ups, have some of the downs, people online, I mean, just adore him or be critical of him. What is that like?
Man, it is crazy. Like being the Dallas Cowboys quarterback. And I saw it with Tony Romo, covering him, but there wasn't the personal connection to Tony Romo. You wondered how people could think he was a Hall of Famer or think he's just a total dud. Like how can two people look at the same person like that? And Dak has sort of been the same way. And I think Dak is even more polarizing than Tony Romo was, for a lot of different reasons, which you could probably do a whole different show on. But you just sort of, I don't want to say you take it personally, but since you do know these kids and, oh, he's just playing for the money and this and that. Listen, Dak Prescott loves the money. He likes playing football for the money. But I promise you, and he's going to get every dollar he thinks he's worth. But he's not playing for the money. I promise you he's not playing for the money. And, it's just sort of that insight that makes it tough to see people that, oh, he's a bum and this and that. And then when he gets hurt, you just have sort of a personal connection and you hate it for him. I mean, he's been through so much this year with his brother committing suicide. And, everybody knows about what happened to his mom years ago. I mean, it's just been such a rough year for that guy. But he's going to come through. Whether or not it's with the Dallas Cowboys, I'm not sure. It might be another team that I've covered a lot. That would be an interesting fit. But, it's always interesting to see that. And you talk about covering stories fairly. One of the toughest thing, if not the toughest, that didn't have something to do with a story to do with someone dying, had to do with Devin White. And that was the final game of his high school career. He gets if nobody remembers, he got arrested the morning of his final game. He was hanging out with a female, him and a teammate. There were allegations of what happened because of her age. He was arrested, and that day was allowed to play in a high school football playoff game. The decision made by the parish and by the school. at North Webster. And man, that is a tough story to write because, hey, you don't want to bash the kid, but this is what happened. I mean, he got arrested and he's playing that night. So the angle I took, and I would still take to this day, is that it was the adults' fault that he even was on the football field. Let it play out, this and that. But how can you wrap your head around a kid being arrested and then that same day playing in a high school playoff game? And you know what? If he was the backup center, he's not playing in that game. Everybody pretty much understands that. So that was tough because, that tests your relationship with Devin White, tests your relationship with his family. I don't care if it tested the relationship with North Webster or Webster Parish because, I was doing the right thing. I was just reporting the facts. But, I think it did take a couple years to sort of get back on the same page with Devin and this and that. But you know what? Devin, the career he had at LSU, one of the most remarkable and beloved players in Tigers history. I mean, what a story from how his high school career ended to what he became at LSU and now the leader he's become at Tampa Bay. I think it's unbelievable. But as a journalist, stories like that certainly test you.
Yeah, and I mean, it's such a weird time to cover anything controversial because everyone has so much of a voice now and so many people expect very aggressive, knee-jerk, black and white type of responses, and trying to find that line where ultimately you're probably just going to aggravate people on both sides because they want you to be more extreme one way or the other. But having that sort of a voice and an expectation from your role, and then having so many other people be able to reach the athlete and connect has I feel like made things really really interesting, increasingly year to year.
And that really I've had fun for 21 years, but the last 4 or 5 years especially, man, it has just become rough. I mean, it's become rough to be a journalist. I mean, even in sports, I mean, we don't have any political ties or we don't have any political motives, but, fake news this and you're liberal that, you're not liberal, whatever it is. And I'm like, man, I'm just covering football games or I'm just covering athletes. Like, I'm telling their stories. I don't have any bias. No one at the newspaper is saying, oh, you have to take a liberal stance on this, or we don't have time. There's not enough people at the Times or any newspaper for someone to tell you how to write a story. I mean, get your facts right, tell the story, and be timely and accurate. I mean, that's what it's all about. And man, it's tough. Journalists are tough, man. I couldn't even imagine being a political writer because you talk about sports journalists having thick skins. If you were a political writer, holy cow. So much has changed. I hate the distrust in the media. And listen, some of the media has done it to itself. I mean, there's no doubt about it. We as a group have done it to ourselves, but 95% of the people out there are doing the right thing, trying to do the right thing. They're going to make a mistake every once in a while. That doesn't mean they're fake news. It doesn't mean they're not credible. If it's an honest mistake, it's an honest mistake. And you can't make those anymore. Not with social media, you can't make honest mistakes. So, that was another reason why it was tough to leave. But, that made it a little easier because of the climate that we're in, for sure.
Whenever I started in Monroe, one of the first weeks I covered a Sterlington and OCS game and was accused by a couple people via email of being biased and, I think it was loving OCS and having an issue with Sterlington, but it may have been the other way around. But I had to tell people, no disrespect in this, but I did not know either of these schools existed until about a week ago when I arrived here. So I promise you I have no bias one way or the other. This team just happened to win the game, and that's kind of how that goes. So it's going to sound better for them. But it's it's certainly been interesting. And I laugh. You mentioned there's not enough time or not enough people in these newsrooms to try and slant things the way that people expect. And the idea of this overarching liberal media and put like spilling that into sports and stuff. I wish people had a sense of how much of a scramble it is just to make that paper every day and how how crazy it sounds to have that level of a conspiracy of not just the entire paper, but the entire media as a whole, all kind of following through on it. Because there's no way.
I can't tell you how many people I've invited to come on down to the paper on a Friday night in the fall and see how things happen, just to get an idea and see, how tough it is. You know how many people have taken me up on it? Zero, of course, because then they wouldn't have the fuel, I guess, to make statements like that. And it used to be email. I mean, we used to have a thing at the paper called Tell the Times, where it was before social media, and you'd get all the crazy people calling this number saying this person that, or you get the odd email telling you you're an idiot and this and that. And then all of a sudden, when social media came around, they didn't have to find your email address and then write an email and compose it. You can get a lot of those. You got some of them. Social media has made it so easy to have an opinion and to have it seen, not just by the person you're sending the email to, but by the entire world, and they feel the sense of empowerment and stuff like that. So, and it's good and bad. Listen, it's not all negative. I mean, heck, if people didn't share my stories on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, I'd probably have 10% of the page views that we have, or 10% of the people actually reading the story about this kid. So, with the good, there's bad, and it's, 5-10% bad. And I understand it. It just, it's not easy, man. It's tough to listen to that stuff. And I know if there was a young person right now that wanted to get in the business, I'd be like, you sure? Like, you sure this is what you want to do? Maybe as a hobby, maybe as a stringer, part-timer. But no, we need journalists. And I think that I think that maybe the relationship with people in the media is probably at an all-time low right now. And I just think, you think about it like the stock market. I think we've gone down, and I just think now maybe we can repair things and get back to some civility when it comes to people doing their job.
Whenever I left the Times-Picayune, NOLA.com a few years back to take primarily a non-journalism job, that's talking to Ron Higgins and Jim Kleinpeter and some of those guys, they said, yeah, I mean, if I was your age, I don't know that I'd want to be doing this or committing to it at the moment either. I mean, you mentioned just kind of repairing the relationships, but when you look at this industry that you've spent so much of your time and energy and passion in for decades now, where do you kind of see it at the moment and see it potentially going? Because it seems like things just continually with the issues for years with ad revenue and then the technological developments and those doors being opened, it seems like it develops so quickly every 6 months to a year, maybe even faster than we realize sometimes.
Part of the problem for me, and I say problem, listen, I mean, people can disagree with me, I think it's a problem, is that the media was a group about this big, and now it's a group about this big. I mean, anybody can make a website, everybody can make a Twitter account, and they can report on things, whether it's sports or politics or news or living, whatever it is. And somehow all of that has suddenly become the media in people's minds. And I think that's a problem. I really do. I think it needs to pare down to not what I believe, not the person I have a similar opinion with, but the people that are doing their job, that are fact checking, that have no agenda other than telling the truth in different things, not conspiracy theories, not all 100 things have to add up in order for this story to be true. Factual. Go with what you got. Go with, stuff that's tangible. And I think we're going to see that. I think that the trust of people in, let's say, 100 different websites is going to maybe constrict to 90, 80, 70, 50 news sources, whatever it is. And I use websites. I'm just trying to get a number in there. It could be television stations, newspapers, whatever. I think we're going to see a constriction. I hope we see a constriction, and I hope it is both sides of whatever argument you want to take, but I just hope it's factual, and I hope there's analysis that helps everybody get better, helps sports get better, helps politics, helps our daily lives get better. You want the truth, but mean, gosh, you can't listen to everything you hear on the internet. You just can't. And what people believe right now is so crazy. It's like unbelievable what people will share and believe when you literally could make 2 clicks and show that that's fake. Like it's crazy to me, Jared. And but I think we're going to get back to the media is going to be larger. There's going to be a bigger base because the internet has changed everything. But I think the more respectable organizations are going to win out in the end. I think. Does that mean they're going to make money? That's a whole different ballgame. You know, the internet and trying to get ad revenue for clicks has been a real problem for most newspaper industries, and I imagine TVs are having the same sort of deal. So whether they make money or not, I don't know, but I think the constriction will happen, and we'll at least, gosh, hopefully we'll have a good base of sources to live by.
You described almost every conversation I've had with my mom for the last like 2 or 3 years, with the sense of we certainly don't see eye to eye on a lot of issues, but I cannot harp enough, man, just make sure it's real. Like just click
Right.
that next link and realize that it's factual or not.
Right. And that you would think that's easy, but we've become so spur of the moment, you know, and even in sports, it's sort of what leads to it. Nobody loses anymore. Everybody gets screwed, right? If you lose a football game, it wasn't because the other team was better. It's because the referees stink, or, you know, they're cheating or something like that. And so that's sort of taken over this mentality that everybody has. You know, you can't say anything negative about somebody either because they're going to get their feelings hurt. I mean, listen, you don't want to be personal, but if something happened and you have to say something happened, I mean, it happened. So we got to quit being so sensitive. We got to take ownership of blame when things go wrong. And I think we're going to be better for it.
We mentioned a lot of, I guess, football and baseball and golf. You mentioned in your note when you announced that you were leaving, even some animals that you've had a chance to cover through the years. What have been some of those different kind of outside the mainstream idea type stories or aspects that you've had a chance to cover through the years that you look back and think, how did I end up just writing this story about whatever it may have been?
Yeah, you know, one of them actually sort of ties to the New Orleans Saints. This is the first one that comes to my mind. I had met a guy on the night of the NFC Championship game against Minnesota before their first Super Bowl when they won. And we were on Bourbon Street at the Red Door, maybe it's right off Bourbon Street. Maybe I'm wrong about the name, but I want to say Red Door. Anyway, we got talking, hey, what do you do? Sportswriter, this and that. He's like, I got a story for you. He's like, every day I come down to the Red Door or the whatever it was, I buy a shot of rum and I bring it to Marie Laveau's tomb with a cigar, put it there every day for the Saints. And I'm like, what? He's like, tell me you don't know about Marie Laveau's curse on the Saints. And I'm like, what have I gotten into right now? Anyway, this guy, Marie Laveau, cursed the Saints. And, you know, that's why they had never won a Super Bowl. So he brings a shot of rum. Literally, I made the walk with him from Bourbon Street to cemetery number 2 or 1 or whatever it is. Put the thing down, put the cigar down. He said a little prayer and went on his way. Next 2 weeks later, the Saints win their first Super Bowl. And of course, Michael Butterworth was his name. He was an attorney in New Orleans. And of course, I had to find him after the Saints, after being in Miami. I came back to find him and do a story on him. And he said, I told you, she loves rum, she loves the gifts, she loves cigars, and the Saints won the Super Bowl. So it's sports related, but that is a really wacky thing. And it was one of the stories that I've heard most about. Hey, the guy that brought the rum and the cigar down to Marie Laveau's tomb, that was really cool. Dogs, I wrote a column. I had a Cocker Spaniel that I'd had for almost 15 years, or maybe she was 15, and it was just time. She wasn't, you know, it was just time. And so this is before there's been movies that have sort of done the same thing. This was before that. I did a 7 days of PB&J. Her favorite thing was peanut butter and jelly. Well, I took her her last 7 days before we had to put her down, I took her to the hot dog man at 2 a.m. downtown. I took her to the lake. I took her to this, took her to that. And we just had 7 days of like a vacation that she got to do all the fun things. And then I ended up writing a column about it. And I probably got more emails on that column, a column about a dog, than any story I've ever written. And I was like, man, I should have been like a living writer or something like that. So that was funny. And then at the Masters, this is what I like to find. I mean, it's great to, I was there when Tiger had that chip in on 16 where it hung on the lip and then fell in. Well, that same year, I found a guy who was a security guard on the 16th tee, and he had been there for 15 years, and he was from Houghton, a guy that we knew, similar people. And I do a story on what he's seen and what his day was like standing in the stands at 16 every day. So, even though you go to these big events, you find non-sports stories to cover. And it's just, if you gave me time to think about it, I can think of a million non-sports, sports-related stories that probably have been some of my most memorable and talked about.
Those are all really cool. And I feel like anytime you're in a bar and someone finds out you're a sports writer, they've certainly I've got a story for you.
Right. Oh, yeah. And, you use a lot of them. That's the funny thing. Some of them are a little crazy. Some of them you could never run. But I have gotten so many tips or story ideas just from talking to people and telling them you're a journalist or a sports writer. And that's what's fun. I mean, I love people. I love talking to people. I love, if you follow me on social media, hey, so if I think you're an idiot, I'm not going to tell you you're an idiot, but I'm going to say, what do you think? I love debating people on social media, but for me, it's never personal. People on social media get so personal and mad at things. But man, I love debating. I just love debating. If you're going to bring facts or you're going to be nice and not personal, I love debating. But I also love the serious, hey, here's a tip, that you need to tell. And that's the stuff I'm going to miss, is logging onto Facebook and never knowing what my inbox is going to have for me about, someone's mama down at Red River where you need to check on this story. Those are the things I'm going to miss.
You're still going to have a chance to write. I mean, you're leaving the Times, but you're going to be covering another huge high school game this week with a Bird team trying to get back to a state championship for the first time in a few years, since very early in the split, versus a John Curtis team that you don't really typically expect to hear John Curtis feel disrespected and overlooked in a playoff, but they're there this year. But what's kind of the moving forward? You've got that one coming up tomorrow, and a lot of other big plans in the near future.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. One of the first calls I made was to Robin at Fambro. I said, hey, if you guys have a playoff game up here, I'm your man. I called Brett Martell at the AP. Hey, Independence Bowl, you need a cover for the AP. I got you. Who knows? Maybe AP needs some help with the high school games moving to Natchitoches now, out of New Orleans. So I'm going to string. I'm going to try and cover some events every now and then when I can. But starting January 1, I will be I guess I could call myself a professional caddy. That sort of sounds weird, but I've caddied for Philip Barbary Jr. If people don't know who he is, he's was a golfer at LSU. He just graduated from LSU this December. He left the program a semester early, and he's going to turn pro January 1. I've caddied for him for about 6 years. When he plays his summer tournaments, his amateur tournaments, made a really good run at the U.S. Amateur this year. We played in 3 PGA Tour events. That's been a blast. The U.S. Open at Shinnecock Hills. So he's going to try and make it on the tour, and we're going to see how his caddy handles it. How long caddies are hired to be fired. There is probably no more unstable job in sports than a caddy, but I've got confidence that we're a pretty good team, and we'll see how it works.
And that's the announcement. You told me right before we started. You hadn't even told many people that that's the move, but yeah. So breaking news.
Breaking news. See that? Breaking news. Yeah. No. I mean, I think a couple of people have sort of, it's crazy. When I made my announcement that I was leaving the paper, I thought Philip was going to have 6 more months at LSU. I thought he was going to see his LSU eligibility through. He got the extra COVID year this year for seniors. So I didn't know he was leaving. So I told him, I went over and saw his last tournament in Birmingham, and I said, hey, I got some news to tell you. And he was like, well, I got some news to tell you. And I was like, what? And he goes, oh, all right, I'll talk to you Monday or whatever. So I saw him in Shreveport, and he's like, all right, what's your news? And I was like, oh, I'm leaving the paper. And he goes, well, I'm leaving LSU. I was like, what? He's like, wow, talk about perfect timing. This has worked out well. So a lot of people assume when I made that announcement and Philip made his announcement that that's why I left the paper, but it really isn't why I left the paper. I assumed that maybe I would get a shot, but it would be 6 months down the road. So kismet, I don't know what you want to call it, but it worked out, and we're going to go out there January 1. Our first tournament's in Orlando, then we go to Scottsdale. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. You mentioned for young folks getting into journalism, just sort of the challenges of it now and being a difficult time to get in. And I've had a chance to start building some relationships with some young college and high school journalists or, budding journalists. That's kind of their career plan. For any of those young folks that are getting into it and sort of feel that passion, and certainly, I mean, as well as anyone, as much as it is easy to say, oh, like, to hell with this, it's not worth the drama. When you have it, you kind of have a difficult time turning away from it. What would your advice to those young folks be, just trying to get started?
Yeah, first of all, I wouldn't tell them to leave the business. I mean, I joke about that. We need journalists. We need good journalists. And there's always going to be stories to be told. Are the platforms going to be different than they were 20 years ago? Obviously. But someone is going to need you to tell stories for them, whether it's a newspaper, television station, website, YouTube channel, something. So find the good stories, be accurate. Number one, be accurate. Your credibility is everything in this business. Take people to task if you need to. Don't take people to task just to take people to task. Just you have to understand the big picture. If there's some minor violation somewhere, you can't treat it like they just committed some major crime. If it's a minor violation, they've got 20 years of goodness. I mean, mistakes happen. So don't be negative just to be negative. But don't be positive just to be positive either. So be accurate, find the great stories. Don't find the great players. Find why they're great players. Could be a father, could be a motivation of a grandmother that died. It could be anything. Find the story behind the story, and people will love reading your stuff, and they will appreciate you being accurate, being honest, and fair. And, it's tough in this business because clickbait, and I'm talking about newspapers, I'm talking about them telling us how to write headlines in maybe even though that's not reflective of exactly what the story is. Everybody's doing it. So it's tough to tell the story without having that crazy headline out there. But do it. Keep doing it, and you'll be fine.
Good deal, man. Roy, appreciate you. As I mentioned, I just have to get ready for the call of Thomas here in a few minutes, but this was about as much fun as I anticipated, and we should do it again sometime, maybe talk about pro caddy life and whatever else unfolds moving forward.
Man, I appreciate what you do, and you fall into the category of people that are honest, the integrity, factual, timely, nice. I mean, but you weren't afraid to write the story that people would think was negative. And I love what you're doing with this, and I wish you all the best, man. Appreciate you.
Again, he's Roy Lang III, just finishing up over 21 years at the Shreveport Times, and still going to be involved in the sports writing arena as well as going pro caddy on us. And for Louisiana versus Loyola, Jarrett Roser. Thanks again, man.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it.